We've done roundtables on pensions and benefits before. We've done communication. We had one just on education where we talked to university presidents, looking at the future of their world and how it affects the workforce. And right now we're putting a very special issue together called Workplace 2021, where we're really trying to go past COVID and past where we are today and look at the challenges and the issues facing HR managers and managers in general over the next year or so. And that's why you're all here. So what I'll do is I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves officially, and then we'll just get to the questions, I guess. So I'll go in order of my screen here. Val, I'll ask you first.
Great, thanks very much, and great to meet everyone. My name is Val Duffey. I'm a Chief HR Officer without portfolio at the moment, so I'm actually in transition, and I've spent my career mostly in financial and professional services. Most recently, I was HR leader at Pearson Airport with a tremendous kind of a transformation agenda. Of late, I've been partnering actually with Mark, who's also on the call, looking at you know, all of the implications for the workplace in Canada post the pandemic, and really building out a bit of a framework in terms of the shifting paradigms that we've been seeing rapidly coming, kind of emerging into the space. So again, great to be part of the conversation. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, Val. Mark?
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you, Joel, for the opportunity. So yeah, my name is Mark Edgar. As Val just mentioned, Val and I have had the opportunity just to kind of put our collective brainpower together in the last few weeks, just to think about the whole concept around reimagine work. My background, not dissimilar to Val's, I also was a CHRO, most recently working for RSA Canada. I left the corporate world at the end of June last year, and since then have set up my own consulting business called Goat Rodeo project, and also I'm co-founder of an organization called Future Forward, which is a community for HR professionals.
Thank you. Jill.
Should unmute. Hi, I'm Jill Wagman. Thanks again for the opportunity. I'm not an HR professional, but I'm the managing principal at Eckler Limited, and we're a pension and benefits consulting firm. So we're dealing with HR professionals daily. And we're also, at least in my role as managing principal and also managing a professional services firm, I'm very keen to talk about what the workplace of the future looks like, both for us and for our clients.
So good morning, I'm Ken Coates. I'm my official title is I'm a Canada Research Chair in Regional Innovation. My focus is largely on sort of opportunities for Indigenous, rural and northern communities on technology and social change, and particularly interested in sort of the way in which unevenness has crept into the way in which we're developing everything from the new economy to new workplace models and things of that sort. And I see sort of the kind of transition that we're in right now as being one of great potential for rural and small town Canada, kind of transitions in terms of the nature of work, but ones that are very likely to go unrealized just because of the built-in sort of bias in Canada toward urban development and urban intensification. So very interested in the world of work and the transitions that are taking place. I've also done a lot of work over time on the role of the post-secondary sector in preparing people for the world of work, and do a lot of work on sort of trying to figure out why employers are so unhappy with college and university graduates these days.
Okay, thank you. I think, Sean, we have you back.
Yeah, I guess you didn't hear me at all?
Yeah, oh, well, we heard the beginning, but then we lost you, so.
Oh, interesting, okay. I'll just restart. Yeah, been running a company that collects employee feedback for the last 20 years. And use that feedback to help executives and managers and teams improve. And what's interesting also is we've been collecting it pre-COVID, obviously, but also during COVID. So we've been running surveys and getting employee feedback about the workplace, return to work, concerns about that, the future of the workplace. So happy to contribute in any way.
So introductions are done. Let's go straight to the questions. We have quite a few. We have only about an hour, so we'll do our best to get through what we can. But I'll just try and go down the list as we can. So the first question is sort of a higher level topic in terms of the biggest challenges facing workplaces in 2021. What are the challenges and what are some of the solutions, or how the ways in which they're dealing with that? And maybe Jill, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I know when I think about 2021, we've recently surveyed our employees, both in terms of how they're doing now, remote working, but also what their expectations are for going back, and what the, I hate to say it, but the new normal is going to look like. And I think for us, the big change is going to be a desire for more remote working. From virtually all of our employees, except for a really small handful, have indicated that they want to spend at least a couple of days a week working from home going forward, which was not the norm for us. And so from that perspective, my concern or challenge is, how do we preserve our culture, and how do we make sure that our relationships are as rich and fulfilling as they are today, because we've all known each other, but when you start onboarding new people, you have less and less contact with one another in person. How do you preserve our culture? So I think we want to offer flexibility because it's clearly working for us. We're doing well, we're working remotely. So there's no reason to not offer that flexibility and work-life balance, but also have a really strong and bonding culture. So that's the challenge I think is facing us for sure.
Do you see that as a permanent fixture, so that remote work is always part of it, or is it phased out after some point?
I think for some people, they would love for it to all be a permanent part of their life, particularly those with young families, long commutes. It's just lifted a real burden off of them. When, some people were driving an hour to get into the office. Yeah.
Okay. Sean, how about you? Some of the biggest challenges for workplaces?
Yeah, I think I agree that, that whole area of serendipity, like how do you collaborate? How do you share ideas? People are very used to, it seems like, just walking next door, running into someone in the hallway, at the water cooler, in the elevator, and talking about a project or an initiative. And that we don't have a way to replicate in a more remote environment. So for example, if I want to talk to someone now on our team, and we're all remote now, or in a lot of organizations, you sort of have to schedule this meeting and have a Zoom call or a phone call or whatever, and it feels almost stifling on the creative side. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, is the creativity and serendipity that comes out of these day-to-day interactions that happen, standing at a whiteboard or whatever. And there's technology there, but it hasn't even come close to replicating that interaction. So I think that's a real concern for companies going forward.
Okay, very good. Val, let's try you.
Unmute myself first.
There we go.
Yeah, I think I think there's a shared societal experience that the pandemic has created, and it's really resulted in a fundamental, very organic reset of the world of work. And so, as we'll talk about a little later, I think many of those elements were already contemplated and underway, but some are very germane, like physical distancing, for example, to the pandemic. So, but the biggest challenge I see is for organizations to quickly adapt to the go forward and really let the past go and kind of take the best of who we've been in the last 4 months. Because I see that collectively we've really raised the bar. And so I think the challenge is going to be to rewire the organization so that it stays high. So, when the crisis took over, we collectively rose to the occasion. We put the health and safety of employees first. We showed deep caring for people. We supported their mental health. We blurred the boundaries between family and work. And we supported our communities with, very organizationally kind of selfless gestures of support. We also, I think, built and flexed a muscle that a lot of organizations didn't even know they had in terms of crisis management and resilience and adaptation. spoken with a number of, C-suite leaders who said, we had a 3 or 4 year, transformation, flexible work, digitization plan that we realized in 3 weeks. And so I think the challenge is really to step back, look at the best of who we've been in terms of how we've showed up as an organization, and really define and redefine our cultures and the way we work together going forward. I think the organizations that want to look back and try and kind of reset back to how it used to be are going to be very lost. I think the winners are going to be the ones that figure out how to take the best of the crisis response and, catapult forward. Many of the big thinkers are saying we're 10 years ahead of where we otherwise would have been in terms of future of work. So let's keep going.
But do you think there's also the mentality of, but let's get back to how we, when things get calmer and, the health and safety has been addressed, we can sort of relax and get back to how we used to do things?
Yeah, I think it's a false sense of safety. Listen, I think human beings, we're wired for, for equilibrium. And of course we want to go back to where it's comfortable and safe. But I think that where we land at the end of all of this, and we're still in it, is that we, a year and a half, 2 years later, we're really going to have found some very virtuous aspects of working remotely, digitizing our customer experience, our employee experience, bringing a more social consciousness to our organizations, embracing, frankly, a much kind of redistributed, kind of balanced, kind of KPI approach to measuring our success. I don't see that there will be an option to go backward. That's not to say that some people don't want to hold on to that idea because it's comfortable and safe and familiar.
Okay. Ken, how about you?
Well, wonderful observations so far. So a fairly long list, but I'll keep it fast. Number one, we were in the middle of a massive change before the pandemic. And I think it's really important. You know this because this is your work. So, we were already struggling to keep up with the kind of changes that were occurring. And now the pandemic has both accelerated a whole bunch of issues, but also created some new opportunities. We can do things we didn't think we could do. And it's really interesting watching how many companies are rethinking how much office space do we need? What's going to happen to downtown? Restaurants in downtown and big cities are actually in real crisis now because there's nobody working there. And the people don't want to come back. They want to come back one day a week. They don't want to come back sort of all the time. So a whole bunch of things. The gap between the needs of the modern workforce and workforce preparation. Our high schools are woefully inadequate. They're not even close to doing kind of workplace preparation we need. And our colleges, I think colleges and polytechs do a much better job, and universities are doing a miserable job at getting young people ready for the workforce. And I think that's one that really bothers me an awful lot. And I don't believe that, what do they call experiential learning, where you're going to give somebody, basically encourage somebody to get a job. And that's somehow going to prepare them for the workplace realities of the 21st century. It's just not going to be enough. The expansion of precarious work, that has 1,000 elements that we haven't really talked about too much in the country as a whole. It's going to become even more common. I think we have to start talking about the potential of a lost generation. And by that, I don't mean sort of 25 years worth of people, but maybe 2 years worth of people. The worst high school experience in the 20th century, the last 100 years, was the one we just had. Those students are going to flop on like fish out of water when they get to university or college in the fall of this year, if they go online. And that'll percolate through the system. Kids who missed most of grade 10 are going to struggle in grade 11 and grade 12. So we've got to start thinking about what we do about that group, because they're going to, the ones filling in the jobs sort of 3, 4, 5 years from now, and not very optimistic about that. I also think we have to, in Canada, think a lot more about the comparative dimension. We look at how we're doing in Canada relative to ourselves, and that is no longer a valid comparison. So what's really important here is, how are they doing this in China, in India? What are they doing in Israel? What's going on in Finland? You folks, again, know this really well. But in fact, those countries and many others are doing an awful lot better than we are. We still sort of have a smorgasbord approach. We think that 18-year-olds can make good decisions about their future. And I think the people who think that haven't had a teenager. And so they've got to be really careful about those kinds of assumptions. In the last one, it is really interesting. I love listening to your comments about organizations and their adaptability. Small business is one of the major part of the employment system in Canada. Under 50 employees, they don't have big HR departments. They don't have wellness coordinators. They don't have, onboarding processes that are anything more than sort of an afternoon's worth of work and preparation. And I think as I watched what's going through with the COVID crisis in Canada, we did just about everything well except small business. And I think small business in Canada feel they've been abandoned. They're closing down left, right, and center. I don't know what it's like in the towns where you folks live. But in Saskatoon, I would think probably about a quarter of the storefronts that were open 4 months ago are permanently closed now. And those families are basically remortgaging their houses in order to sort of keep their business alive in hopes they can make it through till Christmas. So what strategies that actually help small business as opposed to medium and large size businesses are woefully inadequate in Canada. And the folks don't have the time and effort. They're stretched to the limit as it is. So a long list, but not as interesting as all of yours.
Can I just ask you said expansion of precarious work. What does that mean exactly?
Well, just to use universities as an example, about 60% of undergraduate teaching is done by people on short-term contracts. So this is at one level, it's the gig economy. But it's really fascinating. My daughter has just turned 19 and she's entering the workforce as she takes a gap year, not going to university right away for fairly obvious reasons. And it's fascinating because on one side, she has been offered unsolicited jobs 3 times in the last 2 weeks, based entirely on her Instagram sort of situation. So people are watching her. She's an exercise fanatic, a vegan, and all this kind of TikTok-y kind of goofy stuff. And people in town are watching her, and she's been offered 3 jobs, unsolicited jobs, in the last little while. Now that's really good. On average, those jobs are offering her 5 to 6 hours a week. And so what's happening is that she and many of her friends, if they're looking for work and they're not very motivated, if they're looking for work, they're trying to sort of patch one to sort of a 40-hour work week out of 3 or 4 companies. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as we go along. And it's a real challenge for families, the uncertainty, the sort of lack of steady, cash flow,
Right.
that sort of thing. And, when we look through the group here, we have all of us in one form or the other, either are consultants or work with consultants. And at a high professional level, consulting is liberating beyond belief. You say yes and no, and you keep as busy as you want, but you have to have a pretty high level of success. When you're not all that talented and you're not as marketable, precarious work is scary work. So that's what I meant by that.
All right. Thank you. Mark, finally, last but not least.
Thanks, guys. I think often with these sorts of questions, you always dread going last because all the good answers have been taken. But I think it's maybe indicative of this kind of situation that you can go on and on. This may be just the one question that you asked, Joel, and we could go on and on in terms of challenges. So, and I love everything everyone said. And you might see or hear a fair bit of alignment between Val and I around some of the things we talk about because we've had the opportunity to have lots of these sorts of conversations. So I'll just add a couple of things. I think there's certainly the opportunity for us to think about the challenge of mental health. So I think the kind of sense that this would be the situation on mental health could be the kind of echo pandemic in many ways. I think I'm an optimist by nature, but I think it's worth noting that we're not actually through this pandemic yet. So we're not quite sure what the impact will be of a second wave. I don't have a vaccine. Maybe this sense of urgency, as you were referencing, Joel, for people to kind of want to get back to some sense of normal. So, like we're seeing south of the border, the risks of doing that too soon, I think could be very concerning. I think the only other one I'd mention perhaps is just thinking about the shift of expectations of employees. I think I'm seeing kind of 2 big situations here. And I think, Joe, you referenced this as well. I think there's people who are thinking very much around their own health and safety and their own well-being when it comes to remote working. And I think there's also an increase in desire for people, and I'd be interested to see whether you're seeing this, Sean, in some of your research, for people to have much more of a sense of purpose in the work they're doing. So I think the time we've had for people to kind of really kind of be at home and to reflect, and that additional time they've had, certainly from some of the clients I'm coaching, people are really starting to search a bit deeper to understand what the kind of the meaning is, which I know is a bit philosophical. So, I think for me, in summary, I'd perhaps go back to what Val was suggesting, which is around really I think the biggest challenge is recognizing there are so many challenges out there. It's really thinking about how organizations can adapt to all of that.
Okay. All right. Very good. I'm going to try and get through the questions as best I can, but if anybody wants to jump in at any point, just please do so. It's as free flowing as we can do it through a Zoom call. So try if you can. Now, next topic, and Sean, this is something you referenced before about corporate culture and maintaining things like creativity and things like that. So I guess the question is, what does it look like in the next year? How do you keep that sense of culture? How do you create a new one if you need to? What does it look like going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that we're struggling with as a company. Other companies are struggling with. Where I think a lot of companies are going to end up at is a hybrid model where you have a hub where you come in and you socialize and you connect with others on maybe 2, maybe 3 days a week. You're actually physically at a location, and then the rest of the time, the 2 to 3 days a week, you work flex hours or remote or something like that. Of course, depending on the job and the nature of the work, and not all jobs can fit into this. So I think the demand for real estate will change, but it won't go away. It's just going to evolve. So if you think about a lot of companies that have offices in downtown Toronto, maybe, and I anticipate this happening, they'll probably have remote hubs maybe in Mississauga for those in the west, maybe in Markham for those in the north, and people actually come into those locations, much smaller, shorter commute than all the way downtown, to get that collaboration and to get that social bonding. Because I think we're just talking about, Mark was just bringing up mental health. Mental health is a really big concern. Eckler might have noticed this in some of their work they're doing, but it seems the number of people requesting mental health support, mental health calls has gone up significant, and as you'd expect, but it's up higher than where it was compared to last year in a lot of data that we're seeing. So I think that connection to other people is really important. And how do you do that? The thing is about office space, I was just reading some research, something like $11,000 per employee is the cost of office space per year. So you can imagine if you can cut that space down in half, employers are going to be awfully motivated to start to look for ways to do that and still create that culture. So I see that happening, a hybrid model. It won't happen immediately because people are in long leases. You can't just immediately get out of your lease, but it's going to evolve over 4 or 5 years.
Do you think it creates a kind of fragmented cultural experience for workers? Your hub is there, your hub is there.
Yeah, but that's I think that's happening anyways. Like you go into a company or a culture, you've got all these subcultures anyways, right? So Ken was talking about polytech organizations. We work a lot with Sask Poly, for example, and they have the North Saskatchewan campuses and the South, and they sort of talk about the different cultures at both of those locations right now. So I think that's happening anyways. Okay. I think employers are going to recognize, how do we create a bit of a hub, but also make it easy for people to come in and give them that flexibility if the work appeals to them and so on. Or if they can do it remotely. Yeah. Okay. Not every job can.
Now, Jill, you also mentioned culture in your original answer, and flexibility as part of that. Do you have thoughts on, what Sean was just talking about in terms of hybrids or how you're dealing with it?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I guess I'm looking at your question at what does corporate culture mean? We've been around for over 93 years, and we've always talked about our culture and prided ourselves on our culture. But we went through an exercise last year fortuitously. It was a good time to do it, where we really strove to define what it was, because we just couldn't put our finger on what it was. We just were proud of it. And so the exercise that we went through last year was defining our purpose, and then re-articulating our core values. And why that was such a valuable thing to do is that now that we're remote and now that we're working from a distance, we've been really hanging our hat on our purpose and our core values. And so I would say that we've been relying on the purpose and values to kind of define our culture and to inform us on how to behave, how to treat one another, and really what is important to us. Someone mentioned there's a stronger desire now to do meaningful work and purposeful work. And so we keep re-articulating our purpose. We have also, one of the things I've noted has been a big change is we are communicating so much more with one another and with our employees than we had in the past. One of the things that Val said, you know, we have to keep doing this after we go back and after we're no longer all remote. We should continue to communicate a lot. And it's been a two-way street too. So it's I think helped preserve some of that cultural feel of how we do things and how we behave, but it will continue to be a challenge if we do not have enough opportunities to connect face to face.
Okay, Val, I saw your hand, but I just wanted to ask a follow-up to Jill. Would you recommend to other companies, I mean, redefining values, reevaluating purpose? I mean, is that something all or many organizations can do or should do at this point?
It was a really powerful exercise for us. So I would recommend it. We started at the leadership level, and it was through a storytelling exercise, a facilitated storytelling exercise, that we had the leadership kind of piece together what they thought our purpose was, and then we switched over and went ground up and did it with a bunch of staff, like a subgroup of our staff. And thankfully, they were in line with what the leadership thought our purpose was. And so together we came together, and because we did it in a storytelling exercise, it was very emotional. It was very personal. There were tears. There was laughter. It was a fabulous exercise to go through.
Okay.
Joel, I think your comment, is this a good time to do this? I think as Jill mentioned, I think the whole COVID thing it forces, probably forced a lot of things that happen below the surface, but raised it up. Is that aligned with our values or not? Because we've never met these circumstances before. So I think, as Jill mentioned, it probably is an excellent time to do this. If any time isn't, if you do it regularly, every couple of years, you reevaluate, that's really good. Not a lot of companies do that. This is the time to do it, I would think.
Okay. Sorry, Val, go ahead.
Yeah, not at all. I think it's great news for organizations that have a very, very strong foundation in terms of values and purpose. I think where there were virtues, those have been exaggerated, and where there were cracks, those have been exaggerated. I think one of the fundamental kind of paradigm shifts around culture is that we, in the past, I think, have created or been under the illusion that we've been creating or shaping culture at boardroom tables and then kind of rolling it out across the organization. Cultures are cultures. I think the best that we can do and our job now is to really get our arms around how we have, again, very organically and fundamentally reset some of the cultural markers over the last few months. So, the hierarchy has been relinquished. As Josh Burson says, the organization has become unbossed, whereas we were wiring our organizations with rules and incentives and supervisory oversight because we fundamentally thought that people couldn't be trusted and we really needed to manage to the lowest common denominator. We've been quite thrilled to see people show up. We have, unprecedented levels of engagement. Productivity actually hasn't taken a hit. People have been doing the right things. If culture is, kind of how people behave when no one's looking, well, no one's been looking for the last few months, and people have been doing, for the most part, very well. So again, I think that this moment in time is, to acknowledge that we do need to distribute decision-making and power. We do need a more democratized approach to acknowledging our culture. And there is an opportunity, and you can hear from my comments that I'm a tremendous optimist. There is an opportunity to do a reset. But to Ken's point, there are some huge inequities and huge cracks that have shown not just in organizations but across our society, and so we can't unsee some of the things that we've got in our faces right now, and we need to do better. So again, I think cultures have reset, and our work is to really wire the supports in the organization around sustaining the positive resets that we've experienced quite organically in the last few months.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, I like what Val said. The biggest challenge that we see in organizations is the mid-level managers, and having, whether it's, you know, KPIs or performance management system, but some way to help drive and support and encourage performance, because the bums in seats or FaceTime is going to decline, and they don't necessarily have the skills or the capability often to be able to manage that level. So the support systems, I agree with you, Val, they really need a lot of work though. There's a long way to get to that level.
Okay, Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, lots. I'll kind of try and keep it brief. I think there's a couple of things that I'd mention. I think certainly I'd see cultures adapting at this stage, and I think that's what you expect to see with cultures. I love the story you shared, Jill, about what Eckler's done, and I've similarly heard stories of other organizations who had the good fortune of having gone through a similar process and have used that as a really important guide for some of the decisions they've made. And I think those organizations are the ones that will continue to kind of thrive, because it's all around consistency and how your culture kind of held up during this process in many respects. But I don't think it's too late for organizations. So I think if organizations didn't have that in place, then I think it can be tricky to do when you're remote. But I think if you're creative in how you approach these things, and it's not too late to create some of those kind of artifacts and different elements of your culture, and to be very deliberate about that, I think is really going to ensure make sure that you've got the right culture in place then to continue to thrive.
Okay. In an effort to get through more questions, I'm going to go to the next one and ask you, Ken, to start in terms of some of the trends that were already in motion pre-COVID, and sort of how does that impact trends going forward? I think some of that's been touched a little bit at this point, but maybe you have some extra thoughts on that.
I'll be really quick. Number one, I don't think the pandemic is a particularly good model to sort of assume things are going to continue the way they are. It disrupted everything. The kids weren't going to school, all this kind of stuff. Parents were adjusting like crazy. I don't necessarily think we're going to have that same model even 3 months from now. And that's going to make it very, very different. If people, the kids are at home, at least they don't have to drive them to school and ballet class and all that kind of stuff. I'm not so sure that the success we've had over the last 3 months necessarily carries forward. Secondly, we've fallen back on things of necessity. When I talk to people who are working in different organizations there, they describe themselves as zoomed out. We've had more unnecessary
Sorry
meetings.
about that.
No, this is a good example of how to use it. I've had more unnecessary meetings in the last month than I've had in the last 2 years. People who just, we should get together and talk. No, you're wasting everybody's time, and that was a stupid meeting, and I don't want to have another check-in to see whether we're healthy or not. I had 4 of those last week with different groups I work with, and each one was excruciating. Mary, how are you doing right now? Bill, how are you doing right now? So, I think the trends are, there are no trends, so the whole things are sort of happening and tracking sort of very quickly. I was going to go back and finish by supporting something that Val said. We have discovered enormous cracks in the system, and we are not doing anything about it. We're not actually looking back and saying, how are we going to support small business? How are we going to support people in rural areas? Nothing is being done about Indigenous people in the workforce because they're reserve-based and they're not interested in moving into the cities. We haven't come up with new models of preparing people for that 21st century workplace. And it all sort of assumes that the collective memory we know how to work in a company because we've worked in companies for most of our cases for 20 or 30 years. So we can carry that with us and sort of work in the new work environment. We're forgetting about 21-year-olds who've never had a job and haven't actually had any kind of work discipline, and who take advantage of they're so entitled that they take advantage of every opportunity to sort of not work and to relax and to move slowly. We haven't figured out how to onboard those people into a 21st century workplace. And we were already doing a really bad job of it. And now it's going to make it 10 times worse, I think. So I think the trends are, I'm sorry to be a grumpy bear first thing in the morning, but I'm not as optimistic as the rest of you good folks. I think we've got a real problem coming, and I would really urge us to sort of really pay attention to what other countries are doing and the kind of processes that they're working with. Finland, for example, has already changed their high school curriculum to adapt to the 21st century work environment. You know, we haven't actually caught up to the 1970s in our high school system, let alone 2020. So I think, you know, we may be exposing some real vulnerabilities of Canada as we go through this time. And I think we don't want to get too alarmist about it, but we better be ready for that.
Jill, do you think that's true, that the trend is that there are no trends, or are you seeing your own versions of things of what will impact the future?
Well, one obvious one, I think, is the use of video conferencing. We were on the sort of cusp of rolling out, we use Teams, we were on the cusp of rolling it out, you know, some naysayers, some, you know, I don't want to be on a camera kind of people. And we have offices across the country and in the Caribbean. So I do think that as much as we definitely all have probably experienced Zoom fatigue, I do think that there's this video conferencing should continue and will continue in situations where people can't physically be present. At least they can be visually present. And I do think also if remote working is going to continue, then I think there's a positive there, because maybe to Ken's point, if remote working is more acceptable, then that means we can be hiring people in rural communities, and they don't have to physically come into Toronto or Montreal. They can stay and work from their communities. So with the use of video and some other, I guess, techniques, I think it will open up opportunities for those that are not in sort of the hubs of workplaces.
And maybe that's true for training and education and other services, quote unquote, that you provide your employees. You can do that anywhere from anywhere.
Yeah, and it's great for a company like ours. It opens up access to more talent as well.
Right, so. Right. Mark?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Jill. I think there's actually an argument that some of those activities actually help improve some of the inclusion if, again, it's done in a thoughtful way. I also just want to come back to kind of Ken's point, and it didn't sound grumpy bear at all, Ken. I think there's kind of realities that we have to kind of contend with, but I think there is a risk if we don't think about the trends. I think we have to really challenge ourselves to try and understand those trends, because if we don't do that, the situation I see people falling into is saying, well, we can't plan. So planning seems to have become something that's really out of favor at the moment, and people are kind of living on a very short-term cycle and feeling that they can adapt to situations, which you're not going to be able to do if you don't kind of look at the trends, do some scenario planning and really think them through in detail, which I think, you know, in some way, Joel, I'm jumping ahead to one of your questions around resilience, but I think it's important to really test yourself to think about trends. What one I chuck in there is around globalization. I think we've seen this huge trend around globalization, and I could see that reversing as people start to think about their kind of local supply chains and some of the risks that we've seen when it comes to, you know, getting masks, etc., and standard PPE stuff. And I think that's going to result in potentially opportunity. So I'd have a slightly different view to Ken on that.
Okay. Does anybody else want to comment, or I can move to the next?
Well, just around talent.
Yeah.
You know, I agree. It's great. It's good and bad, because it opens up, as Jill was mentioning, a lot more of a larger talent pool across Canada, but also globally. So now all of a sudden, with more remote work, people are going, well, why hire someone, you know, here when I could maybe hire someone similar and remote than in from a more cost-effective location. So it's going to put more pressure, I think, on I think Ken's getting at it, the education system to get our people, both inside organizations and people joining that skill level, so they can be competitive. Because now you got to be not better than someone else in Ottawa. If you're looking for a job, you got to be better than the internet, which is everyone. And that's a lot harder to do.
What about from the HR point of view? If you had a candidate pool in area A, but now you're looking at the entire planet, how does that affect or change the way you do work? You look at your attraction and retention issues. That's kind of a follow-up for Sean, but anybody can comment on that.
I think it impacts all of those things. It ties in with some of the remote work stuff. I think the other challenge, and Facebook have been kind of in the public press around this, is just around how you deal with some of the salary differentials as well around that. So you've got kind of same work being paid at different rates because you're tying it into the market, and there's an opportunity for that kind of behavior to be kind of weaponized in some respects, where people are then thinking, well, it's actually cheaper for me to have somebody based in X rather than Y, and kind of, yeah, I wonder whether it kind of reverses itself in some respects and becomes a disadvantage over time.
Right. Jill, actually, that might be an issue about in terms of pensions and benefits and those kinds of things. If you have workers all over the place, they have different expectations, they have different needs. Is that something you're thinking about or dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, geographically, there will be challenges. I think also, as Ken mentioned, if there's more sort of gig type work, that's also a challenge when you're delivering pension and benefits. So yeah, the whole pension and benefits delivery model is kind of up in the air a bit. And we're exploring other models rather than, it's really been designed for full-time salaried employees who are with one employer for, maybe not their entire career, but for some long length of time. Whereas now, and some strides have been made already, but it's looking at how to let an employee kind of have coverage and then be able to take that coverage around with them. So maybe attach the coverage to the employee rather than to the employer.
Are these actual things you're doing or looking at right now? I mean, ways of creating those programs? I
think there's been movement towards those types of programs, and they are in early stages, but certainly we're talking about them and looking at them.
Okay. Val, did you want to say something, or I'll move to the next question?
No, I certainly can jump in with the next question though, Joel.
Okay, the next question is, I call it scars, the scars of 2020, which can be, there's a lot of things going on. Obviously the pandemic, kids not being in school, we have racial unrest going on in the world. Just a lot of, there's an election year in the US, which is causing a lot of strife. There's just a lot of stress and tension going on besides just the pandemic. So the question has to do with how does that influence attitudes towards work in 2021? How do you incorporate the needs of people's, well-being, I guess, within those tensions to get them to go to work? So Val, if you want to start there.
Yeah, I think adversity is probably the best teacher. I think that 2020 really is signaling the rise of social consciousness within organizations, and many were already there, but there's no longer a divide between the organization and the rest of society. It's not happening out there, it's happening within every shape and size of workplace. And it's been a very humbling and humanizing equalizer, right? We can't look away from one another anymore. We know we're frail in the face of a killer disease. We're conscious about how dependent we are and how grateful we are for essential workers who, risk their health for ours. We see the disgrace and the inequities of, living conditions for our seniors and working conditions for the most vulnerable. We watch in horror, and many of us, we think it's the first time, when we watch a video or we look at the experiences of racialized and Indigenous colleagues and Canadians, and these things have been around for generations. We're shining a light in some very dark and awkward places. And to Ken's point, yep, there are significant systemic gaps. But the good news is that we're talking about them in the mainstream. And now that they are seeing the light of day, organizations are going to be responding, you know, and I think given some time and you know, again, I hold a very optimistic view of the human condition. I do think that we're raising the bar and that we can do better. I think there's a new humility and a new respect for work, for workers, and for, you know, the centricity of employees in our workplaces, in our businesses, and in our economic fabric. And so I do think that the shift is really around, you know, redefining, you know, our success in terms of, you know, profit and shareholder value to one that's much broader and inclusive of societal, you know, dynamics. And to Mark's point earlier, there's a new expectation that has been set. So, you know, I do think that the history books are going to look back on this as a real shift in the social organizational kind of knitting together of that fabric in our society.
Okay, Mark. Sorry. Well, Mark, you can go. I was going to ask Ken, but it's okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a huge amount I can add to what Val said. I think she articulated it really well, to be honest, Joel. I think the only, again, optimist, but the only thing I'm slightly concerned about is the shift to people perhaps thinking about themselves a little bit as well. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I kind of see this polarization where people do become much kinder, which I think is fantastic. I think there's also this sense of people needing to look out for themselves a little bit. And I think we still do see some of that human nature. So, you know, the analogy would be around kind of, you know, mask wearing and almost the kind of responsibilities we have to be good kind of citizens to kind of wear masks. But still see people not doing that and taking that responsibility. And so I think there's that part of it as well. People looking out for themselves that we need to try and make sure that we're kind of fleshing out.
Okay, Ken.
Each one of these questions we could deal with for at least 2 or 3 hours. So you keep asking us these bold questions. So some things really quickly. First off, we don't know what the scars are. It's way too soon. We don't know what's going to break and what's going to work. It is a formidable test, exactly what both Mark and Val were just talking about. This is a real test of sort of national ability, organizational ability, and personal ability. We've done relatively well as a country so far. But I'd add three things. When you have a crisis like this, historically, people end up with a real fear of the future because you don't know if there's another one coming. And, you know, we don't know how we're going to live with the fact that we may always have these things. We may have viruses coming year after year, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't know how people react to that. We also are going to see, I think, a real acceleration of national differences. Some countries will succeed and some will not succeed. And so the real question is, which line are we on? Are we on the sort of the Japan, you know, Israel, Finland sort of line? Or are we on the United States and China line in terms of countries that are sort of running into challenges? I wish I could be more optimistic, and I'm just not. But the third one, last one, is we had a surge of government support that was completely unprecedented in Canadian history. And the unwillingness of people to go and try to get back to work has really said some not so nice things about Canada's sense of sort of entitlement. We've got companies, we're importing, you know, fishery workers into the Maritimes right now. I was just in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, and they've got fruit rotting in the fields in some farms because they can't get enough immigrant workers. And 20 years ago, they used to get people from Quebec coming out, and they can't get them to come out anymore. You know, so why would you work when you can get just as much money or almost as much money just by staying home? We're also going to discover, as the research is done, that we've had an awful lot of people who've milked the system, who've, you know, got the money from the government and still went and found part-time work that was done under the table. So we've got a really interesting question here, because the flip side of this, and this is the really positive side, we're also seeing a huge burst in entrepreneurship inside organizations and outside organizations, of people doing the kind of stuff that Jill was talking about, saying, hey, let's be creative, let's be responsive, let's do some interesting things. So we've seen some really great, you know, sort of young people surge to the fore and bringing up wonderful new ideas. So we don't know where that balance is going to end up. Are we just going to get back and keep asking the government to solve everything for us? The government's quite content to do that right now, and the public's quite content to take it. we can't afford one more year of that. I personally don't think we can. So that balance of entrepreneurship, individual and collective, and sort of relying on the state is a really interesting philosophical, ideological sort of puzzle.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The next question has to do with mental health. And I realize that we keep covering a lot of the stuff that ends up in future questions, but in terms of mental health, I mean, it's obviously an important issue. It has become more important over time, where employees and employers have recognized the need for that. But obviously now is a very difficult time, and it also has to do with the scars. But maybe, Jill, I thought I'd start with you in terms of how employers are helping and what they should be doing more so in terms of the programs they offer, in terms of just seeing what's going on within their own workforces.
Sure. So I think, most employers with benefits programs offer employee assistance programs, which through the EAP gives employees access to mental health resources. And so I think what we've been doing certainly for our employees is just re-emphasizing the availability and the accessibility of the EAP. That's, having said that's sort of not the be all and end all, and we're not mental health professionals. So what we've been doing is we've been encouraging, so we've first of all, we've had a lot more personal conversations with our employees than we ever have in the past. And I think Val referenced that the lines are blurred now between, our corporate social responsibility, our personal relationships, and our work. But we have been having some very open and honest conversations with our employees. We've reached out routinely to make sure that, for example, they end their day at a reasonable hour and don't go back on their computer at night. Like the line between home and work, really, we're trying to draw that for them. And yeah, we just keep reaching out and letting them know that there are resources available and that we're available to talk. Having said that, there's some people, I think one of the things that we've talked about a little bit, but even just within my workforce, the pandemic has impacted everyone so differently. The very young person who joined us a year ago who lives in a 500 square foot condo on the 25th floor is suffering greatly from loneliness and a lack of being outdoors and things like that. And then there's the young families with children running around and they can't get their work done. There's just so many different types of stresses, and so we just keep acknowledging that and encouraging them to speak up if they can't get their work done. We have really, one of the things I think that this hopefully helped is this lighter touch management that Val referenced. Is we're not checking in and seeing, how many hours did you put in, et cetera. It's like focus on results, cut them some slack, and acknowledge that if they're having challenges, that's okay, and they don't have to be at 100% all the time.
Are you seeing from your own clients as well the similar ways of dealing with it, or the similar programs that they offer them?
Yeah, I think, most of our clients do offer employee assistance programs and mental health resources. One of the things we've noted, because we have clients all across the board in all kinds of different sectors, is our clients are suffering very differently. Like some are flourishing, some have pivoted and are, almost in a new kind of business, and others are really, really struggling. So it's a very different experience on their part as well.
Okay. I see we have about 5 minutes left and a few questions. Now I'll ask, can everyone stay a few extra minutes, or should I? Yes, everyone's good? Oh, perfect. Okay, so I'll just get to the next question though. In terms of, is there such thing as business model resilience, and how can companies achieve that when they move into 2021? So can you build a business today, or can you rebuild your own business today that is resilient for future things you don't know about, perhaps? Sean, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and what is defining resilience? But yeah, I think absolutely, because you're seeing that both in some companies in Canada and some companies around the world, they're still remaining successful, and they've been able to adapt and absorb the COVID case and continue on, where others, have really struggled. The airline industry has really struggled, but so you got to think about not just the model. If you're a digital organization, if you're a knowledge-based organization, very different. You can work in these environments. If you're moving physical people around and people don't want to move anywhere, that's a real challenge. So how do you change, that? So it really, I think, is dependent on the industry. I think you can sort of have, and this forced the hand of a lot of organizations and senior leaders to have protocols in place, standards in place for how they deal with, unknowns that are going to be coming, whether it's another disease or a virus or something, some other major catastrophe. I think this has taught a lot of organizations a lot of really good lessons, and they started to think about their emergency preparedness plan. They often had one because of certain standards, whether you're lean or ISO or whatever, but they never really had to implement one. Here they had to implement it, and they start to saw, I think it was Val or Jill, the cracks in their plans. And I think that'll start to create better plans and then a more resilient organization down the road for handling these things.
Okay, Mark, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think again, Sean makes some great points there. I think it's interesting. I spend quite a lot of my time kind of studying all the various trends reports that are going out, and there's very few of them that mentioned pandemic as a kind of big thing that's going to happen. So I think that's indicative of the fact that it's something that would be really hard for any organization to guarantee that they have created resilience in their business. But that shouldn't take away from the ambition they need to really think through how they do everything they can to try and create as much resilience as possible. And I think that could be around how diversified their business is. But I think for me, and it's probably just more the bias I have around the kind of people side of things, I think it's around the qualities that the organization has and the capabilities the organization has to kind of really adapt to these different situations. And I think thinking that through in the right way takes a lot of kind of structure and a lot of imagination around scenario planning. I remember meetings I used to have with groups of executives where we were kind of real worst case scenario type stuff. And I think that kind of process can be quite cathartic in a way to then make sure you are building the right sort of capabilities to mitigate some of these things that are going to, I think, continue to happen.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll just build on what others have been saying. I think that the pandemic has taught us that we really cannot anticipate every circumstance. This has been a true black swan event. But what we can do is, and I think the analogy is the same as we can, build up our immune systems in terms of our health and well-being with good nutrition and exercise and sleep and lifestyle. We can do that as an organization also. So yes, there are some critical capabilities, but there's also some critical mindsets. And I think kind of the beginner's mindset, what I call, kind of zero-based everything, like really, truly getting used to letting go of our assumptions and building for an ambiguous kind of future context, and how we build that kind of capability into our organizations. I think there are some table stakes kind of organizational capabilities, digitization, analytics, crisis management, agility. I think that to the extent that organizations have fared well over the last few months, it's because they do have these things in their DNA, but they are able to be built. And if you don't have it yet, you best make some investments for the next wave of whatever that is.
Okay, and Ken, sorry, you wanted to weigh in.
No worries, super fast. I think this is the Olympics of resilience. And we're going to figure out who wins and who doesn't. There's a lot of gold medals, but a lot of 45th places as well. Three things I would say. Number one, that complacency is over. It was already weakened, and everybody knows now you can't count on anything. And I think that's really, really important. Interesting watching the university system, which has complacency embedded in its DNA, and they are panicking. Like you wouldn't believe. And whatever they're saying, whatever the university president is saying publicly, that's not what they're saying privately. They are terrified. The speed of change is unprecedented. We thought the digital transition was fast. This is way, way faster. But the other part that's really interesting is I'm amazed at the scale of opportunity. that a crisis like this has created opportunities that people never imagined. And those companies that are resilient and creative are doing way, way better than they ever thought they would. And just really interesting watching Indigenous development corporations, which we don't know very much about in this country. And boy, some of them have really taken off in the last 3 months, which is, who would have thought, right? Because they're resilient organizations, they're used to bad news. So this was just big bad news.
Right. Okay. I think what I'll do is I'm going to ask question 7, and then I'm going to combine question 8 and 9 as one question. So 7 has to do with generations. You obviously have different generations in the workplace at the same time. They deal with situations differently. Employers need to deal with them differently. So that is the question. What kind of tactics should employers take to approach the workplace as a generational issue? Val, you.
Do you know what? I think I'll be bold here and say I think generations are kind of something that we should probably put to one side. I think it's a pretty blunt instrument and it has some very big generalizations in it. I think that there are new filters like family status and living status, health status, that and type of work that are kind of going to be more important going forward. But I think all of this, and again, this was conceived of long before the pandemic, the employee experience is a bespoke employee experience, full stop. And what's incumbent on the organization and on kind of societal constructs in terms of work is that we meet people where they're at, and we have the flexibility for people to work on terms. To Jill's point earlier, we've built and designed systems where we assume that people are going to be working 35 or 40 hours a week. Well, that's not the reality anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. And so we need to, we need to create systems, digitized systems, talent platforms, employee experience offerings that allow people to step in on their individualized terms and work to their optimum. So I think generations is an old idea.
Okay. Jill, do you agree with that, or do you have other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my notes when I was thinking about this question is not, we won't be approaching post-COVID generationally. I think we would be approaching it personally. So we have no intention of requiring anybody to go back before they actually feel comfortable and safe. And that could be for a whole variety of reasons, whether they're at the older spectrum of their career, or, we don't know if they have other vulnerabilities, or maybe their home situation is different than others. So yeah, the post-COVID approach to the workplace for us is going to be a very personal approach.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I just can't help but weigh in to say how exciting both those responses are, because I think we've been very kind of lazy about generational labels for so long. So it's an interesting that people unprompted have seen that shift to a different way of doing things. But I think it's also just worth noting that personalization of the employee experience that Val touched on is going to be a hugely challenging thing to actually create for organizations, particularly when they're looking to do things very simply and very and automate as much as possible. So we're going to see this kind of tension between those two things, I think, which is going to be interesting to work through.
And I sort of tend to agree a little bit with Val about it is a pretty blunt instrument, but it's still an instrument, and you can sometimes use it, but where you're at in your life cycle matters. But generally speaking, a lot of younger people who don't have children, what we've noticed in the data is loneliness, not being able to socialize, and they're working is a big problem. And they're in smaller apartments or condos, or, unless they go home to their parents' place in the suburbs or whatever, which happens a lot. We're seeing a lot of that, people where they've gone home and how's your workspace? Well, it was terrible at my own home, but now it's good because I've got my parents' house. So we're seeing a lot in the 20 to early 30 generation. The other thing, and again, it's not exactly by generation, but the other big issue that's come up in the data we've seen is childcare. People saying, well, I want you to work from home or return to work or work remotely, and we're going to do more of it. And there's no solution to the childcare problem yet. And, you know, I know Quebec has a little more, you know, better system in that they've got much more cost-effective childcare that they could use. But that is a big concern of anyone with young children. And we saw that loud and clear in the data. It's probably the biggest concern, other than the loneliness that I mentioned for the younger population. Those with children is, what do I do with these kids? They, if you want me to be productive, I gotta figure out a solution around that. And that's not solved yet. That will have to be solved. And I think government will start to be involved in this for sure.
Okay.
I think
All
Joe,
right.
let me just jump in on that just very quickly. I think it's just I think that Sean's example is a really good one around the kind of people in the 500 square foot condos, as Jill mentioned. But then you kind of, the risk I see with some employers is thinking, okay, well, let's get all the millennials back. That's easy. But then you layer into that the fact that you've got somebody who's got some sort of immune deficiency or a pregnant partner or, you know, whatever it might be, and it starts to quite quickly become quite complicated. So that's the risk that I think we have to work through. But I think a lot of data and insights is going to be the thing that helps organizations solve for that.
Okay, very good. So the last two questions, I'm just going to combine them. It's about engagement strategies for that employers should use to align their employees with business objectives. But the second part of that is, do you do it all at once? Do you kind of do it in a slow, methodical way in terms of rolling out engagement, rolling out strategies? How do you get people on board for the new workforce, new workplace next year in the best and efficient way? Maybe Ken, I'll start with you.
I'll be really fast because I want to hear what the rest of you have to say. You know this better than I do. My big thing that I think is that we're seeing the fundamental value of trust. Organizations that have a high level of trust between their management and their employees are actually doing really well. Organizations that do not have that trust are really, you know, top-down, arrogant, sort of, you know, domineering kind of organizations are really having trouble keeping control. So my own view is that you have to build at a fundamental level continuous trust, and you need constant engagement. One of the things that surprises me when I look at different organizations is some of them are sending out, you know, really small bits of information almost a daily basis. It's not a big deal, but they're letting people in on the mysteries of what's going on in the company. Hey, sales are down this way, sales are up this way, we got a problem here, we got a problem there. The other ones are a bunch of managers who think they can solve all the problems, and then once a month come out and say, we just laid off 47 people in this office because we don't need them anymore. And everybody in the whole organization now figures that they're next. So I think this question of trust, which is a fundamental one in business anyway, but one we don't talk about enough, is key to all of this, and it's a great test.
Okay, Jill, do you have any thoughts about, yeah?
I agree 100% that it's all about trust. And one of the things we learned very early on is that it's okay to tell our employees that we don't know. Like we don't know when we're going back. We don't know if we're going to serve, like how business results are going to, you know, come through this. And so we're keeping them in the loop. And so month after month, it's like, good news, we're still doing well. We don't know if we're going to continue to do well, but we're still doing well. So when I look at, you know, 2021, I don't even know what 2021 is going to look like. Like right now, 2020, we've had some acceleration of work for a variety of reasons. So does that mean 2021 is going to be the bad year? We don't know. And so we just keep engaging them through small surveys and then feeding them back the results and letting them know what we can and can't commit to. For example, the remote work policy, we haven't committed to anything yet, but we have acknowledged that you all want to work, most of you want to work remotely, and we're taking it into consideration, and we recognize we need to be more flexible. So just snippets of information and trust and being honest. And again, just admitting when we don't know the answer, just telling them we don't know yet. So I think, yeah, we're going to continue to survey them periodically. And we've had also town halls where everyone is on a call like this. And of course, not everybody can participate because we're 320 people, but we just keep talking.
And does it, I mean, it's nice to be honest, obviously, and show trust in your employees, but does it raise red flags with them too? Oh, you can't tell us. Why can't you tell us? You know, are there sort of backlash?
The only time we say we can't tell you is when we don't know. So for example, I don't know Right now, we've committed to saying nobody will be none of the offices are going to reopen before Labor Day. And no one will be required to go back before the new year. And those are the two dates that we kind of picked out of the air. We also let them know that those dates might change. So, but they just want some level of certainty to say, oh, good, okay, I won't have to go back, before the new year. So that just gives them some comfort that, yeah.
Okay. Val, any thoughts?
Yeah, I echo what Jill is saying. It's a very vulnerable time for organizations, and we have been, in this big engagement experiment for the last 4 months with the constant communication and the openness and the vulnerability and the somewhat kind of democratized co-creation of who we are going forward. That gone are the days where we, kind of go into a back room and design, culture, design engagement, and then roll it out. That's what we're doing. We're in an open conversation about how we're moving forward, kind of each and every day. One of the things, Joel, that we haven't overtly talked about is kind of leadership. And I think that, where we see leadership going and what we expect of our leaders is really the same thing we expect of the organization's persona, right? It needs to be people first, kind of character-based, conscious, mindful, open, authentic, empathetic, right? These golden rule kind of emotionally, kind of conscious behaviors are where we've, kind of where we've been living for the last 4 years, or 4 months, because there's been no choice. That's where we, kind of that's the kind of the line that's been drawn through all of this. I think that it's time to, solidify that as an approach going forward. So you talk about, rolling out business plans or doing engagement. I think it needs to be constant dialogue, the mini surveys that organizations like Sean's, help us to just create that constant feedback loop. I think that is the way forward.
Okay. Mark or Sean, any thoughts?
Sean, do you want to go?
Yeah, well, a few things that we're seeing, some interesting things, organization, they're experimenting. Some of them are going to work, some of them are not. But, with remote work or partially remote work, we're seeing employee or organizations do things like, providing sort of the sort of colloquial sort of online happy hour is what we're seeing. But we're also seeing a lot more other things because not everyone wants to participate in online. So, where we've seen some organizations that have little groups that are going off and they're doing online exercise or yoga together or online cooking with a group of employees. And that way they're starting to build those social ties that they've lost. So some virtual team activities like Clue or Code Break, these are things that we're seeing organizations do with subsets of employees that are interested in that. Not everyone's going to be, and they're facilitating those types of things to share some of the social side that they're trying to build. I think it was Val or Jill, I can't remember who brought up leadership. The other interesting thing is we've seen a lot of leaders sit back and start to think about their leadership style in this COVID. And when you ask them to reflect about what they've learned, they're really learning a lot about what they like about and what they think makes a good leader for them, and what some of the assumptions that they had that aren't quite as strong anymore. So for example, some of them thought they would have loved working from home, and then after being from home, they said they really miss seeing their team in not a command and control way, but they missed it a lot more than they expected. So I think from a leadership point of view, them taking time to sit back and going, me as a leader, what have I learned, or what should I be doing more of, less of, and how am I different? I think is a really good exercise that can help them be better leaders into tomorrow, into 2021.
Mark, did you want to make a last comment?
Yeah, I think it's very brief. I think it's great points everyone's made. I think the only thing I would encourage when you start to think about the engagement strategies that you need is to actually ask your employees. So I think there's a great opportunity just to kind of use that in a very meaningful way. The kind of concept I heard very early on in the kind of whole pandemic was this idea, rather than welcoming people back, is kind of welcoming them forward. So this idea of kind of taking their learning to really inform what you're going to do into the future, which I think is a kind of really interesting opportunity that if organizations seize, I think they'll get a lot of benefit from that.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate everyone for staying longer on the call. That was really good. I think we'll wrap it up here. I want to thank specifically Eckler and Jill Wagman for being a sponsor today of the Roundtable. Also TalentMap for being a partner as well to Your Workplace magazine. And again, thank you so much for your time today. It was a really good chat and I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thanks, Joel. Good job.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
everybody.
much.
Nice to see you.
Really
Nice
well
to
done.
meet
Have a good day.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.